in the driving rain of the mighty rushing wind.
Good morning, friends from Allensville United Methodist Church. It is my joy to join with you this morning. I just want to share with you a few announcements, some prayer requests, and a devotional for your week. So, friends, the first announcement is Vacation Bible School is well underway. It's going on right now. It started last Monday night. I'm so grateful for all the participants we have from Allensville and Trinity United Methodist Churches. It is designed for children preschool through 5th grade, just having finished 5th grade, so going into 6th grade this year. If you haven't signed up, it's not too late. Email me. I am happy to get you signed up. The theme for the Bible school is Compassion Camp. It's all about having compassion for ourselves, for one another, and for God. And if you can, it usually meets on Monday nights from 6 to 7 online. But if you can't make that, it's okay, because you can do it at your own pace. You can watch the videos later, and there's several activities that are done throughout each week. So there's opportunities for cooking, for crafts, for music, for all the fun stuff that we normally have in Bible school and more. So we want to get everyone signed up that we can. That this is available for children, for grandchildren, for friends in the community. If you have a child who would benefit from this, get them signed up. It doesn't cost them anything to join, and they do not have to be in our community in order to participate. So please contact me if you have any more questions about VBS. I also want to share with you this morning a couple of additions to our prayer list. Please be in prayer for Donald Hubbard from Trinity. He had cataract surgery on Monday. It went well, and continued prayers for healing. Please pray for Peggy Davis from Trinity. She fell on last Saturday night, so Saturday, July 4th. She's bruised, but thankfully nothing is broken. Pray for her as she recovers at home. Philip Knott also fell on Saturday, July 4th. He's bruised, but again, thankfully nothing is broken, and pray for him as he too recovers at home. Please be in prayer for Caitlin Elliott Red. She is from the Allensville community, and she's in her early 20s. She has leukemia, and chemo has worn her down. She is in the hospital now with pneumonia. She has 2 children, a little girl who is almost 4 and a son who is about 7 months old. She asked for special prayers, especially since she's in the hospital and not able to be with her family or to have any visitors at this time. I also have a few joys to share with you this morning. It is joy to share with you that Deb King from Allensville Community, who's been working for the last month with NIH out in Arizona, is back home. We're glad to have her back in the community. It is a joy to share with you that Leighton Birch, the great-granddaughter of Martin and Rick Gentry, is improving after having RSV. And Catherine Briggs is at home from the hospital. Continued prayers for healing as she continues the healing process at home. And as always, if you have any prayer requests, please feel free to share those with me. You can call me, text me, or email me. Thanks. This morning, I am the preacher for the Perko Collective service, and so I hope that you will tune into that service again this week. You will notice in that service, you will see Allensville United Methodist Church building in that service online, but I wanted to give you a little bit more information about that building that is not fully incorporated into our worship service this morning. You see, we've been doing some work this week here on the church building at Allensville. And as I watched the construction workers work on the church, I realized that Allensville United Methodist Church is a literal altar to God. You see, some of our oldest members recall how in 1933, Stones from throughout the Allensville community were hauled up to this site, and they were stacked one on top of the other in order to form this beautiful church which we worship in today. You can see this church building itself is an altar, a literal stacking of stones to God. You know, this week we've been shoring up this altar to God by installing an extended roof over the entrance to the sanctuary and to the fellowship hall. And this particular altar to God, I realized, is 87 years old this month. Many of us are moved when we remember encounters with God that we have had in this church space. We ride by this building, this standing altar, and we point to it and tell our children and our grandchildren stories of God's faithfulness. And so, friends, I wanted to share with you a little bit more about this church space. Some of our older members I know are aware, but in 1956, this building was featured in an article by the Saturday Evening Post. It's from May 19th, 1956, and I actually pulled that article this week, and I read it, and I wanted to share part of it with you. Listen to this rich history. Among the many country churches in North Carolina, there are more than 300 of several denominations which share something in common. These churches may be large or small, of brick, fieldstone, or wood, standing on the beaches of the Outer Banks or nestled back in a mountain valley, but they have one thing in common. They pass through the hands of a shy, warm-hearted little architect named Edward Haynes, and they are the better of it. The design is often the easiest part of his job. How to help a hesitant committee of royal deacons get building materials without money is a subject architectural schools don't teach. But Haynes has frequently found excellent free materials for the taking, directly overhead and practically underfoot. That's what happened at one of his earliest projects, the picturesque little church in the crossroad community of Allensville, where people still talk of their church workings of over 20 years ago. Now I remind you, church, how I told you that this building now is 87 years old this week. The old church was falling down around our heads, Deacon Robert Gentry recalls. But times were mighty hard then. We were standing around the churchyard kicking at stones because we didn't know what else to do. And Mr. Haynes asked if there was much of that rock around. We told him farmers had been picking that flint out of their fields since slavery days. There were piles of it all around the countryside. He nodded, then looked up at the trees. It was kind of shady. Miss Gentry always said she never wanted to be buried back in that cemetery and all them bushes anyway. Somebody said, well, it don't take no money to cut trees and haul rock, and the first thing we knew, we were building a church. That's how one of Howard Haynes' most heartwarming churches got started. The minister, the late Reverend Samuel Nix, helped push, of course, but he had other churches on his circuit that he could not neglect. Men, women, and children went out and collected the pink flint stones. Some of the kids brought in special rocks from their mother's gardens and can point them out to their own children today. The Duke Endowment contributed some money, and a fine old stonemason named Jim Painter, who has since died, was brought to lay in stone. At $2.50 for a 10-hour day, he was the highest paid man on the job. One of the teenage volunteers was Enos Slaughter, the future big league baseball player. On working days, people would come for miles to pitch in, Baptist too, Miss Gentry recalls. The night before, the men would hunt squirrels for Brunswick stew. You could get 50 or 60 between quitting time and sundown in those days. They weren't exactly in season, but after all, was it not the Lord's work? The men ate so much at noon that it was a wonder anybody got back to the job. The kids loved it. One day, the parents of little Jack Crumpton, then 5 years old, left him at home But Jack had other ideas. His short legs carried him the 5 miles to the crossroads in good time for dinner. The last day of Stoneland was a Saturday. Mr. Painter, who had a taste for blackberry wine, began exploiting it before noon that day. The question arose as to whether Mr. Painter would finish the wall before the blackberry wine finished Mr. Painter. As the afternoon went on, 3 men joined him on the scaffold to hold him up. With 5 stones to go, the blackberry wine was declared victorious, and Mr. Painter was lowered to the ground. Mr. Ed Gentry, the senior deacon of the church, climbed up on the scaffold and laid the last 5 stones himself. You can see them there to this day. I never knew anything like it before or since, Mrs. Robert Gentry says today, a little sadly. Building our own church brought a whole new spirit to this community, thanks to God and Mr. Haynes. I loved this story. The story is posted in the senior Sunday school classroom, but I actually went this week and pulled from the archives the original story. And it's worth reading. It goes on to talk about other churches in North Carolina, but it features prominently our own Allensville United Methodist Church. You know, friends, we've been experiencing a new and a unique season right now in which we've been invited to create our own home altars. As much as we love this building, we are expanding our stories out beyond this building to worshiping at home. And I realize today that this is a unique time in the life in which our children and our grandchildren are going to tell their children and their grandchildren about this unique year, this year in which they weren't able to worship in person, but instead they gathered in their own homes. You know, and it's my prayer that as we gather around these new home altars, you're going to see your faith grow and mature as you realize that God comes to meet us, not only at a certain hour in our church buildings, but that God comes to dwell in your home and beyond. These new altars, they're a living testament to the expansive presence of God in our lives. And this is the next page in the history of Allensville and Trinity United Methodist churches that are going to be told over decades and decades and decades and decades to come. May it be so. Amen. Grace and peace.